Here we go again, another lamp post repair job. This time the GFI inside the garage trips off when it rains. Once it dries out, it resets and the lamp post works. But we're pulling up the wire right now to see if there's a bad spot that we can repair. But so far, we've not found a bad spot. So I think we're going to end up trenching in a whole new line to the lamp post. Now with this particular post, this is a more elaborate post that comes in sections. It has the lamp head top, and then a top section, and then a bottom section, or actually 3 sections. And of course, the Allen screws that hold the sections together are stripped out and they won't come apart. So hopefully we don't have to take it apart and we can find a bad spot in the wire and repair it, but I don't think we're going to get that lucky. So here we go. Now we've dug up the wire through the mulch bed to the edge of the sidewalk, and there's no sign of any damage. So the damage is either where they ran it under the sidewalk, we're not seeing a conduit, which you usually want to put a conduit if you go under a sidewalk, or somewhere between the sidewalk and the post. And this does have a concrete base. It's more of a commercial type setup with stud bolts where the lamp post bolts to the concrete, and typically the original installer doesn't put a conduit in and the concrete makes contact with the wire, and over time it damages it. So here's what we're dealing with right now. The Allen bolts that hold the sections together are stripped and been painted and won't come out, so I'm in the process of drilling them out. Okay, we got the first one drilled and the lamp head is loose, so we'll pull that off and start the disassembly. Now, so far so good. I was able to get the set screw drilled out, and the lamp head actually is threaded onto the very top of the post. So we move down to the next section and we'll drill out another. Well, I'm going through drill bits, but so far I'm having some success at disassembling the lamp post. The screws are just set screws to keep it from spinning, and then the pieces screw together. Okay, making some progress. Boy, how they got that photo cell way down there, I'm not sure. We may end up having to cut in a new one down here. So far so good, one step closer. The next piece came apart, and you can't see it right now, but looking down the hole, it does look like there's a conduit stubbed up through the concrete, which doesn't happen very often, but maybe, just maybe, somebody put a conduit in the concrete. Well, what I thought was going to be the most difficult part of disassembling the post didn't turn out too bad. There is a stub of a conduit. Hopefully they 90'd it out. So now we just have to finish the dig, and I think we're in business. Yeah, these are not my favorite lamp posts, and I've only installed a couple of them, but it just takes a lot more to set the concrete base with the bolt studs. I mean, they're nice looking, but just more than I like to install. At least this one has a lot shorter run through the grass for sod cutting. Something I didn't mention on the last video is they do make sod cutters, but for most of our jobs, the distance is short enough to where it doesn't pay to go rent a sod cutter, and we don't do enough of these to justify purchasing a sod cutter. Yeah, I've peeled up the sod, and now we just have to finish the trench. I think I'll start out by the concrete, see if I can find the end of that conduit. See if they properly 90'd it out of the concrete. I'll be damned. I can't say I've never seen it done correctly, but they actually ran a conduit in the concrete just for this purpose. If it ever has to be replaced, you can get the wire back in under the post. All right, next task, how do we get under the sidewalk? Hey, let's just bust up the sidewalk and run it that way. I don't think so. All right, well, what I'm doing here is I've got a piece of galvanized rigid, and I'm gonna beat down the end with a sledgehammer to give it a point so I can drive it under the sidewalk. Okay, so that just sharpens it up a little bit. We'll drive it under the sidewalk, and then we'll cut the end off with our Sawzall and go from there. Yeah, and just like that, the pipe is through the side or under the sidewalk, and then the end that I smashed to make a point, I'll take my Sawzall and cut the end off, and we'll put a couple insulating connectors on it so it won't damage the wire on both ends, and then we've got a rigid conduit under the sidewalk without tearing up the sidewalk. Okay, where I smash the conduit to make a point to make it easier to drive under the sidewalk, I've cut it off with my Sawzall, and then I'll take a rigid compression coupling with a plastic bushing insulator and put it on the end of the pipe. Now, before I do that, to make it easier to get the wire through, I'm going to go ahead and sleeve the wire through the connector and then through the pipe before I put the connector on the other end, because a lot of times the wire likes to get hung up if you put the connectors on first. Now, I'd mentioned the wire type before, but this is UFB 14.2 outdoor wire. This wire is made specifically to put right in the ground without conduit. Okay, you can see the connectors on the pipe. There's a rigid compression connector with a plastic bushing. We call them OZs. I'm not sure where the OZ came from, but that's just what we've always called them. In the industry, I think that's a 1/2-inch plastic bushing, but that protects the wire from being damaged, and that should last forever. Galvanized rigid, heavy duty, good to go. I've already got the wire through the pre-installed conduit through the concrete slab. Now we just have to assemble the post. My partner went ahead and installed a brand new dusted on sensor in the post, and it is LED rated. That's something you want to make sure that you do with all the LED bulbs. If you put in a old style dusted on sensor, it may work for a while, but with the usage of LED bulbs, you need an LED electronic rated photocell. Another thing I'm going to try to fix here, when we got here I could tell that the lamppost was leaning, so that means that the base is probably off just a little bit, which isn't uncommon, but the studs hopefully are long enough to where I can shim it and level up the post. We can only do what we can do. We'll give it a try. Another little tip, when you go to reassemble your pole, Anywhere where there's a bolt or a screw, put some No-Lox antioxidant on the nuts and bolts. That way they won't seize in place. If you ever have to disassemble it in the future, it should come right apart. I'm going to put a little No-Lox antioxidant on the threads of the post. It doesn't take a lot, but just enough to keep the threads from seizing. Put just a little bit on, and as you screw those pieces together, it will distribute it throughout the threads. Going back together, everything turned out pretty good. The light works. I have black tape over the night sensor just so the light would come on and stay on. We're backfilling the trench. I was able to level up the post somewhat. It's still not exactly perfect, but it's a whole lot better than it was. The studs aren't long enough to make a proper adjustment, but just going back together. And just like that, another completed job. I've already removed the tape from the photocell, so the light went off. I've got the sawed pieces back in, everything's back filled. Can't hardly tell we were even here. All right, let's get the freak out of here.
That was big.